pleased to be joined once again by a guy we just saw at the NFL Combine a few weeks ago, but he's going to be here with us on Fridays through the draft, Steve.
Very nice.
It is one Greg Cosell joining us, senior producer from NFL Films and co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, and he's wearing his Bills sweatshirt today. He's fired up, Steve. Greg, how we doing?
I'm doing great. I figured, there was a week or two off. I'm back now. I had to wear the proper attire for today.
Yeah,
that's right.
I like it. Yeah. I like it. Free agency has been interesting, Greg, to say the least. I think and Steve and I have talked about this on the show. I think it's taken on a different, I don't want to say maybe approach, but I think a lot of GMs have come around to adopting the one-year contract philosophy maybe more than we have ever seen before. I think part of it's due to the fact that you have teams that are cramped for cap space after the cap went down during the COVID year. They're trying to recover and balance their books from that. But it's very interesting. The number of one-year contracts seems far greater than we have ever seen before.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And it is really interesting because normally you get longer contracts. Obviously, as I'm sure you've seen, the NFLPA is not very happy about it, but that's the way it is. And guys seem to be holding out for more, but they're not getting it. It'll be interesting to see if that's kind of the wave of the future now.
The Bills, a little bit of a trend. They signed Connor McDermott off of the Cowboys. Connor McGovern off the Cowboys. And they also followed it up with David Edwards off the Rams, going to interior line. We knew that they had some contracts that expired. Yeah. Tell us a little bit. Tell us what your objective opinion is about these guys.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I haven't studied those guys in hardcore detail, but I think we talked all throughout the season that they needed, to upgrade the O-line, and whether that meant guys who were there playing better or getting some different players for competition. Obviously, they knew that, so they went out and they got Connor McGovern. They got David Edwards. David Edwards was a Wisconsin kid, if I remember, and they usually put out pretty good O-linemen. He's been around the league a little bit. He started, I think, some meaningful games for the Rams. So it'll be interesting. One of those guys is probably going to start, if not both. Barring anything unforeseen. Who knows how the draft's going to play out, of course. But they definitely needed to address the offensive line. And, I think it's a start. Now we'll see what happens with the draft because, I think that was a position that we all felt that needed to be, addressed this offseason.
And then, they signed 2 linemen. They also signed 2 receivers. Yeah. And, the Harty signing, the kid from New Orleans, he's kind of a McKenzie replacement. And so, not surprisingly, McKenzie is released a week after they signed Harty. Would you say there is any part of Harty's skill set that is different to that of McKenzie? Is there anything extra he might bring to the Bills' offense?
Yeah, Harty I am familiar with. I would say he's probably a little more vertical than McKenzie. McKenzie has good speed, but Harty can really get over the top, and he's really, really good run after catch. But he's really a vertical guy. He had some plays with the Saints where he just ran by the coverage, just got on top of it in a heartbeat. He is that kind of guy. I remember he caught a touchdown, I think. It was probably last year, not this year, from Jameis Winston, where he just ran by everybody. And you see right now what we're looking at. I think he's better run after catch than McKenzie. So even though he may be asked to fill a similar role, I think he's better at that role and gives you a little more juice.
You talk about as well, one of the surprises for the Buffalo Bills in free agency was their ability to re-sign Jordan Poyer. Nobody thought that was going to happen at the beginning of free agency, but the safety market was a little bit flush with talent. Poyer's, 32 and
missed 5
games with injury. So it came to the fact that he was kind of sitting there, and the Bills wanted him, and he wanted to play, so here he is.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good move because he's a really good player, obviously knows the defense. I think that we all thought that, he'd be gone. He even talked about being gone, really, as I remember, for some public statements. But he's a really good player, and I think that it's really important that he's back. I'm sure there's a quarterback element to him as well, being on the back end. So he gets people lined up. He does all those things that you need from a back end player, in addition to being a good physical player as well. So that was a really, really important signing. It's funny. You mentioned Harty at receiver. I actually think Sherfield's a really important signing too, by the way.
Yeah, because, I mean, he finally got a chance to show his wares on offense last year in Miami, which he really didn't have much of an opportunity in Arizona or San Francisco prior to that. And I thought he showed some interesting capabilities in the receiving game, whether it was contested catches, run after catch. And I think he's a little bigger than some people might realize at 6'1", almost 220.
I think that gives the Bills something that they don't necessarily have. I mean, you can certainly say Diggs is that kind of receiver because he's pretty complete, but Sherfield is a very good short to intermediate receiver with size, ball skills, catches the ball. I think he gives you, I hate to be cliche and say the possession receiver, but in some ways, that's what he is. And I'm not sure they truly had that guy, Brownie. Like I said, Diggs, you'd probably say is complete, but he's also your number one, so he's not quote unquote a possession receiver. I think Sherfield gives them that. And like you said, he's got pretty good size. And we just saw in that touchdown that just ran that he can run a little bit too. I know they really liked him in San Francisco. And obviously he did well in Miami this past year as the third receiver. I thought that was a really good signing for Buffalo.
What about this talk we hear about a guy being available like DeAndre Hopkins? It looks like Arizona's going to move on from his contract. They're looking for maybe some takers. Certainly, he was injured last year. What can you tell us about what he has left in the tank at a guy who's going to be, I think, 31 during this summer? So he's not completely over the hill, but certainly his best days may be behind him.
When he played, he still was really productive, Steve. Don't forget, he's not a burner. It's not like, oh, gee, he lost a step, he can't play. I mean, his game is built on physicality, just an innate feel to separate at the moment of truth. He's not one of those guys that runs away from people. He's really good at finding voids in zone coverage. Obviously, we know that his best trait is he catches the football. I mean, in some ways, and you'll remember this player really well, in some ways, wouldn't you say he's kind of like a Chris Carter, who wasn't necessarily a burner, but caught everything and just had a knack for creating just enough separation to catch the football. You wouldn't say he's a great separator, and that he's got great short area quickness, but he's a little deceptive in that regard. So Hopkins, I look, if Buffalo were to have the opportunity to get him, and I think one reason he hasn't been moved yet is because Arizona is probably holding out for what they think they deserve, but they're not going to get that. So eventually they're going to move him, and it's probably going to be for a fourth round type pick. And that's probably worth it for a lot of teams, probably including the Bills.
Yeah, I've made the comment that you get Diggs and Hopkins on the same team. Diggs is a guy who seems to always be open. Hopkins is open when he's not open.
Correct. And and you also have a quarterback that has no problem turning it loose. So, some quarterbacks are a little leery in turning it loose when, they feel like the receiver may not be open. That is clearly not an issue with Josh Allen.
Speaking of guys who can't turn it loose, what is your take on the situation in Baltimore with Lamar?
Well, it's funny. You go to the combine, you have a lot of conversations, and you learn some things that, you really, unfortunately, you can't really talk about publicly. But I think there's a lot more to that story and to the situation. I don't want to make it a story like, it's a guy's life, but there's a lot more to that situation than is publicly out there. And I think from what I learned, there's probably reasons why he may not be in high demand right now. Obviously, he'll get worked out at some point. He's not going to get a fully guaranteed contract more than Deshaun Watson. That's not going to happen. I think he's starting to realize that. So we'll see what happens. It sounds like from what you read, and that's all we can all do, that in his mind, he's done with the Ravens. But, then you need a taker. Then you need somebody to trade for him, right? Because he's under contract. He's not a free agent.
Right. Franchised.
Yeah.
Looking at the rest of the AFC East, Greg, I want to just run down some of the acquisitions of the Dolphins, and you tell me who you think is the best add for Miami in terms of helping their roster, okay? So I'm not going to hit everybody, but I'm going to hit most of them here. Jalen Ramsey, Braxton Berrios, Dan Feeney, Deshaun Elliott, David Long, and then they got Freddie Swaim off waivers from Seattle. Which of those players do you think helps elevate them the most?
Who was the first name you mentioned? Ramsey.
Jalen Ramsey.
Ramsey really helps. Every team in the league would love to have two corners that could line up and play man coverage. And Ramsey is probably frothing at the mouth right now because he didn't play a lot of man coverage with the Rams. That's just not the way they chose to play. When he was with Jacksonville, he played a lot of man coverage, and he wants to play man on the outside. And now they have two corners that can do that, and that gives you so many more options on the defensive side of the ball. I also think David Long is a really good player. He was with Tennessee last year.
Right.
He became a player that played literally until he got hurt, and it was the year before as well, who was literally playing every snap. So he's a really good player. He's better than Landon Roberts, whose role he'll essentially take. So that's an upgrade there as well. So those two players, immediately jumped out to me. Obviously, Ramsey's the bigger name, but that really gives them a ton of defensive flexibility.
Do you feel like Fangio is probably going to lean more man coverage with Ramsey and Howard on the outside?
I think Fangio probably plays Brownie more man than people might think, but even in quarters, there's a lot of match principles that they play. It's that whole match, carry, deliver concept, and they get to that in multiple ways. And quarters at its core is just kind of a zone match deal. It's ultimately you're playing a lot of man even when you play quarters. So, I think that, Vic Fangio's been doing this a long time. Every coach wants good players. Jalen Ramsey is a good player, arguably better than good. And, I think now he's probably rejuvenated with the fact that he's going to play on the outside opposite another good corner in Xavier Howard. So, I think that it'll work out well there. That's going to be a tough defense to play against.
I know there's been a couple of hundred guys around the league who have signed, but off the top of your head, can you think of any signings by teams that you were scratching your head over? Like, what is this? It doesn't fit, or you didn't see there was no value there, or they let one guy go and signed a guy who wasn't as good for more money. I've heard a couple of those transactions as well. Any of those come to mind?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So many guys have signed.
Right. Yeah.
You have anybody in particular? I mean, there's no one who just immediately pops into my head because so many guys have signed.
Right. Give us an idea of what you thought about Tremaine Edmonds going to Chicago. They signed him, and right before they signed Tremaine, they signed also another linebacker, and I can't remember his name right off the top of my head.
I tell you, that's really interesting to me, both signings, because I think a lot of people would say that inside stacked linebackers is not where you want to spend a lot of your money in today's NFL. So that struck me as interesting. Now, they didn't give T.J. Edwards a lot of money. They did give Tremaine Edwards a lot of money, Edmonds a lot of money. But, it was kind of just surprising that was kind of a defensive focus for them. But we'll see. I mean, that's the way they chose to go. Edmonds, look, you guys know him well. He's a good player. He's a really solid player. There's not many guys his size and length who play inside linebacker in this league. So that's a plus right there. Edwards had a really nice year in Philly, playing behind a really, really good D-line. But they obviously allocated a good amount of resources to the inside linebacker position. And I think a lot of people, like I said, would say that's not where you want to be allocating a lot of your resources.
Taking a look at the rest of the AFC East, Greg, so the Jets add Alan Lazard and McCole Hardman. They trade away Elijah Moore, who, for whatever reason, never seemed to get the ball in that offense. And they get a second round pick back for him. I mean, that was a coup as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, I agree.
What do you make of the additions to the Jets passing game? I mean, I know Aaron Rodgers isn't there yet. The general assumption is he eventually will be. But what do Lazard and Hardman do to diversify that passing game?
Well, I think in their mind, Hardman was an important get because they wanted a vertical dimension. He's not a volume target, Brownie. They know that. But I
Right.
think with Wilson, who was going to be their volume target, and certainly with Lazard, who was kind of a secondary volume target, but Wilson is the main guy, Garrett Wilson. They wanted a vertical dimension because of the impact it has on how defenses play. And so even though Hardman is not going to catch 70 balls for 1,200 yards, he is a guy who can run. And obviously that didn't play out last year in Kansas City. He was hurt. He missed some time. He just didn't have that kind of season. But he can certainly run. So I think that was an important move for them. They wanted that kind of player. As I said, Lazard, he's kind of a secondary volume guy. We all assume they'll get Rodgers. We'll see how that plays out. There's been a lot of talk about who has more or less leverage in this deal. I know Joe Banner, who I know, believes that the Packers are the team that they're a little bit more in trouble here, that they have to get something done, and eventually they're going to end up taking less because they're the team that's on the hook for an awful lot of money, not the Jets.
Yeah, how do you think that changes everything for the Jets? Is Rodgers going to transform that franchise if he gets picked up by them when he goes to the Jets, as we all think he will? Is he really transformational at this point?
I mean, he can still, Steve, throw the ball really, really well. I mean, you're talking about a guy that it may be the best thrower we've ever seen. And while I don't think he moves quite as well as he has in the past, just a function of getting older, I think if he's well protected with weapons, they've added weapons. I think if you protect him, he can still throw the football really, really well. And they're going to get Breece Hall back. So, I think that they will have a very good offense. Transformational is one of those words. It's like generational when they talk about quarterbacks coming out of college. He's clearly still a pretty darn good quarterback. And, so yes, he would make the Jets significantly better because the Jets actually, as you guys know, the Jets have a pretty good football team. They just had really spotty quarterback play a year ago. It was, and I'm probably being kind saying it that way. They really didn't have a quarterback that could line up and play on a week-to-week basis. So if they get Rodgers, he's going to line up and play every week. That's what he does, and he still throws it exceptionally well.
Yeah, saying the Jets had spotty quarterback play is a little bit like saying the Titanic had a scratch.
I was trying to be kind.
Let's finish up the division. Last one from me, Greg. Just your thoughts on New England's additions of Mike Gesicki and Juju Smith-Schuster, two players that would seem to fit in terms of helping a quarterback like Mac Jones. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I think that maybe the bigger get is Bill O'Brien because I think now they will have an NFL offense and I think Mac Jones, we kind of know what he is. I don't think there's a mystery to him. He's a ball distributor. He's an efficient executor. That's what he is. You need weapons and you need an offense that's well schemed and well designed. And we know Bill O'Brien can do that in the National Football League. I think you'll see a lot of two tight end sets because Gesicki is essentially not really a tight end. He's really a detached player. He's straight line linear, but he's got vertical seam ability. So I think that really helps them. And Juju Smith-Schuster, at his best, assuming health, is a physical receiver who works really well between the numbers, again, where Mac Jones throws the ball really well. So I think in their mind, they really help themselves. And by the way, speaking of which, Damian Harris, I thought was a really good signing by the Bills also.
Right.
What'd you like about Harris the most? I mean, he's a little bit
well,
bigger back,
I've always
obviously.
thought he was a really good runner. The issue for him has been durability. He was he was the number one running back coming out of high school when he went to Alabama. He was good at Alabama, like most Alabama backs with few exceptions. He did not have a ton of carries. I think he's physical. He's about 220 pounds. He's physical. I think he's got some juice. I think he's got some shiftiness to him. It's just that he's hurt a lot. So hopefully that's not the case. But, it speaks to the fact that they wanted a back in their mind. They weren't going to re-sign Singletary, who, when all said and done, was, a nice back the way they chose to play before, but not a high-level back. And they're getting a back that, in theory, if healthy, can, in given games, carry the ball 18 or 20 times. And I think they realize, I would assume they realize that there are games where they need to do that. If they get a lead in the late third quarter, fourth quarter, you need to run the football a little bit. And we saw this year that didn't happen in certain games. And some of those games they still ended up winning, but it got a little tight when you'd love to be able to line up, run the ball, eat some clock, get a few first downs. And Harris is that kind of back.
Greg, thanks as always. We'll catch up with you next week. Appreciate you running down the free agency tally here in the division. Thanks very much. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too, guys. Thanks.